Hello and welcome to E333. I'm your instructor, Gregory Myers. In this video, we are just simply appending the one that we worked on earlier when we were testing our export custom function. If you notice here, I am simply creating three users. I have populated the fields associated with them, and I am using an output file and an output file writer to generate an output file that corresponds to the user ID appended with the .user file extension. A couple of things to note in this example is I have once again populated the address, the city, and the state, but also notice that down here I have written each one of the output files, or opened rather each one of the output files with the true for the second parameter. Now we want to take a quick look to see what that behavior is, because that true there means that we append an existing file. And so I've ran this now once, and you'll see that what it's doing is it keeps appending the information. Once again, this might be something that we want to do maybe to track the state of the changes of the user as the system evolves. Or what we can do is we can simply change this parameter now to false in case we want to simply overwrite any existing information. Once again, it depends on the purpose of your system. This would be a way that you could build a built-in log, essentially. I'm going to go ahead and build this one more time. I'm going to clear my screen. I'm going to rerun it. And now you'll notice that I have three new files, this time just with the current information in it. Now, the last thing I want to do with this particular example is I want to go back to the user driver, and I want us to see how quickly we can leverage what we've done to test our export XML. So the first thing I want to do is I actually want to open up Notepad. I'm going to bring it over here so that you can see it. I'm going to take all of the contents of my export custom, make a copy of it, come over to Notepad, paste it, and then I simply want to do a replace of custom with XML. Replace all, Control A, Control X, and now paste it inside your export XML function. Go ahead and save it. Come back to your command line. One other little change that I realized that we needed to make is in our exporter, we're still specifying the .user file extension, so we will need to change the .user to .xml. Save it once more, build it, come over here to the command line, and now instead of exporting custom, we can export XML, and you should now have 7 files, or 6 rather, in your folder, and you'll see that you now have a corresponding set of XML files, which you can view in NetBeans, or you can view in your web browser. One additional thing that you can now do once you've tested your ability to export custom and export XML is you can come back to your user class and you can leverage your array list to do the same thing now as a static function. And to see what I'm talking about here, let's split our screen. We'll take our user driver over here, and we'll just briefly keep some of our objects here so that we can see what we're doing. But what we want to do now is we want to create a additional pair of functions. We'll have a public static, and we could make this one also Boolean. That's perfectly fine, or we can do it as a string. The advantage of a string, of course, is that you can actually see the data. The Boolean will just tell us whether or not it's been successfully exported or not. But what we'll do here is we'll say public static string, and we'll have exportCustom, and we're just going to say exportCustom all. And then we'll also have a public static string exportCustom or exportXML all. And for right now, we're just going to temporarily stub this in with a return and then double quotes. Return and then double quotes. But what we want to do now is we're going to leverage our array list to be able to then publish or push out, export all of the users in the array list. All right. And to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to look for all of the objects in our array list, and we're essentially going to repeat the process that we did manually in our export XML and our export custom. All right, so let's see how this is going to work. We're going to start off. We're going to go ahead and create a temporary variable. It's going to be a string. We're going to call it results. We're going to send it equal to a empty set of quotes. We're going to also have a java.io.file. This is going to be our output file. And then also a java.io.file writer, output file writer. All right, and then once again, the same try catch that we saw just a little while ago. And the same system.io print. We're just going to simply, in the event of an error, we're simply going to print out the toString for that exception. But then inside of our try here, we're going to do two things. The first thing is we're going to set up a loop to essentially loop through each one of the elements in our array list. To do that, we're going to need one more temporary variable. We're just going to call this one index. And we're going to build a for loop. So for index equals to 0, index less than our array list, our users array list. So users dot, and we want to leverage then the size of the array list, and index plus plus. And now everything we did earlier, we're going to do again, not creating the users, but instead we're going to leave that part for our driver. But what we're going to do now is we're going to create the new output file, or initialize then our output file variable by saying output file is equal to new java.io.file. And what we're going to do is we're going to leverage whatever that current user's ID is. So we're going to say users dot get, and we're going to specify the index, but more importantly, we're going to say users.get parentheses index.id, and then we're simply going to export like we did, or excuse me, append to the file name then the .user file extension. Let's make sure that we've got all of our parentheses matching. There we go. So we've got our new user file initialized. And then we want to do the same thing now with our output file writer. And that's going to be equal to new java io.file writer. All right. And then we're going to specify the output file. And as we discussed earlier, in this context, I'm going to say false because I want it to be overwritten, not appended. Before you forget, you want to go ahead and close the file. And then in between the two, you want to do two things, okay? Number one is you want to append the contents of that file. You've opened the file to override it, but you want to use the file writer, the append function. And you want to append the particular user that you have you're iterating through to get using the index. And we want to simply call the exportCustom or the exportXML, in this case, the exportCustom for that particular user. And the last part, which is mainly just a convenience, is that you want to do the exact same thing now with your results. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to say results plus equals users dot get index dot export custom. And then depending on whether or not you have appended the new line on the end of your export custom. So if you scroll down here, you'll see under your export custom, on the last field, we've actually appended a new line. You could optionally add another new line here. It's completely up to you. Now, minor detail, you can decide a couple things. First, you probably want to move this line outside of your open and close of your file just because you don't want to leave the file open any longer than is absolutely necessary. The second thing to note here is this is really inefficient for larger arrays, lists, etc. And the reason for it being is you're ultimately going to be appending a string, but you're also going to be returning that string. So probably want to reconsider this if your array gets pretty large. Probably as an alternative that I would suggest would be, instead of returning the entire set of values or all of the attributes for each object, something that you could consider as a compromise would simply be to say users.get index and then simply keep the ID and append to it, then a new line. So in other words, basically you'll see what users were exported. It's completely up to you. Okay, but just keep that in mind that that results variable could get pretty big. All right, now we can see here that this is going to be very similar in our export XML. And so what we're going to do is we'll come back to that one in just a second. Let's go ahead and save this. Let's go back now to our user driver, and it means that we have got to figure out another way to call this. So we have our import custom, import XML, the export custom, and the export XML. What we want to do now is we want to create one more static method. We're going to say public static Boolean, and this is going to be our export custom all. And it's not going to require any input arguments. We can borrow some of the code from our other ones. So calling export custom all. But the main thing that we're going to want to borrow is going to be our code to initialize or to build up our 3 users. All right, so we're going to quickly see that we're either going to be duplicating this code or what we can do in a later video is I'll show you how to have essentially a setup function. For right now, we're just going to duplicate this block of code here that creates our 3 users. And then the last thing, of course, is going to be our return results, which in this case is not really changing any. It's just simply using the results equal to true. Now, what we want to do, unlike before where we manually handled all of this, including maintaining these 2 objects for the output file and the output file writer, what we want to do now is we simply want to make a call to that static method that we just created. So up here, what we want to do is we'll say system.out.println, and we're going to go ahead and combine this into one step in that we're going to say ee333.user.exportCustom.all. And remember that that's going to return a string. Okay, so it's going to print the string to the console, but simultaneously it should be writing all of those files based on the objects in our array list. So basically it's taking this array list, it's looping through all the users, it's getting their ID to generate the file names, and then exporting the contents of each one of the objects to the file. Now, the next thing that we want to do is just to prove that we're actually accomplishing something. I'm going to delete all of our users, and then we're going to, all right, jumping forward, what I've done here is I've went ahead and deleted my files in my folder just so that I don't have any of the existing users. I've also added in my logic here to handle a new switch called exportCustom.all, which basically behaves very similar to my exportCustom for testing purposes, as well as my exportXML. And then I've created a function down here, exportCustom.all. I've borrowed the code then from the other functions, with the main difference being now that I'm just doing a system.out.println, and I'm making one call to that static method user.exportCustom.all. All right, so once you've saved it, compiled it, come back over to your command window. You'll see that all I have here is my E333 package folder. So if I rerun now my driver class. So in this case, it's going to be user driver, and I provide to it the switch for export custom all. You'll see that a lot of information then gets printed to the screen, perhaps unceremoniously. In other words, I don't have a nice table this time around. It's just basically one big string blob. But more importantly, you'll notice that in your directory, you have your 3 user files back, and each one of them has the appropriate information in. So this time, instead of calling the individual methods on the instances of the object, we're actually calling a class level method that then loops through all of the elements in the array list. And real briefly, if you want to take a look at what I was talking about earlier as far as limiting the amount of output, we're just going to turn this feature on where it prints just the ID, or excuse me, aggregates just the ID. And then we come back over here to our user driver. One more time, clear the command window, and you'll see now I'm just simply printing out the ID. Once again, less noise, if you would. The last step that we would want to do here is we would want to go ahead and stub in a function. Instead of calling it export custom all, what we want to do is we want to create one more static function, and this one's going to be export XML all. And same thing, return results. And we want to initialize our results, or declare and initialize our results to true. And then just like before, what we want to do is we want to borrow the code that essentially builds up our objects. And once again, we're going to see that there is another way to go about doing this. You would essentially have another private method that would simply build up a collection of objects then to test. But then we'll do a system.out.println of not our individual objects, but of EE333.user.xml export XML all, which means that basically what we'll need to do now is we'll come back to our user class, and in addition to our export custom all, we have our export XML all. And if we're very careful, we can simply copy and paste the code and make, as it turns out, very, very few changes. Particularly, the one change that we're interested in is the method associated with the object. So in other words, this export custom needs to be changed to the export XML. And then the other little tweak that we need to make is simply change the file extension from a .user file extension to a .xml file extension. Other than that, it's pretty much the same. And so we'll build this. We'll come back over here to our user driver. Want to make sure real quick that we have the switches enabled. So we come back up here to our to the main logic in our main here, in which case, if we are once again very, very careful, very surgical here, we can just borrow some code, and the only thing that I need to change is the custom all to instead XML all. and likewise in my output to the user. All right, and if we build this one, let's see if we've got any other issues. I think we've got everything we need. And let's come over here to the command line, and we're going to change this now to export XML all. And let's see here, do we have a typo? Let's see if we've spelled it incorrectly here. I believe I failed to make one change I needed to. Yes, there we go. So up here in the equals ignore case, I'm going to change this one to XML. All right. Run this one more time, and you'll see there are my 3 IDs, but more importantly, if I do a dir, you'll see that now I have both my .user and my .xml file extensions. Hopefully you found this example useful. As always, if you've got any questions or ideas, feel free to email me. Thank you very much.